those principles must be defined by thinking big. We must be thinking in terms of how we can actually do more good. And I think I heard that in another presentation earlier today. Let's think about doing good and doing more good. I do want to quote McDonough and Brauhart's book. It's called The Upcycle. And they're saying, forget this zero. Everything now in the environmental domain says, go to zero. Zero emissions, zero this, zero that, lower this. But it does get us as human beings into this cycle of pulling down to nothing. Instead of going the other way, which is creation, instead of going the other way, which is innovation, which is building something from what we know, this zero is basically putting us down. So the idea from the upcycle is to start thinking about building more good and forget or leave in the past the zero. We can think about that a little bit. And this is critical because it impacts all of us. We said environmental footprint, and what does it mean? If you're in planning, for example, there is a certain number of items that you're going to look into that. You're going to look at maybe energy intensity of your development. You're going to look at water intensity, land use, etc. If you're in the construction side of things, you may be focused primarily on the material intensity. And what does that mean? What are the impacts that creates? Maintenance, very similar to that. But thinking beyond and doing more good, I submit to this group, has provided today already in the discussion some very powerful tools. The PVI, the pavement vehicle interaction, is a piece that didn't show up until you look at the use phase of what the impacts are of whatever the infrastructure is. Whether it's in our buildings, whether it's in our infrastructure, it is the use phase, and by us looking inside that use, that we can start finding pieces that we were not even considering 10 years ago about what the impacts were going to be. So getting up close and personal with the thinking of how can we do more good, how can we stop about this continued use of the traditional less and less and less, gets us into the positive note of coming up with solutions. Reduce, recycle, all these things are great in some domain, but again, is not the bigger good that we want to achieve. With that in mind, I say we can do some things. There are standards and specification bodies internationally that help us and guide us in terms of how you can frame the discussion, how this language that I'm talking about that we need, how can this language work out? And in these bodies, this is not about work that they need to do. This is work that we need to do. We are part of these bodies, and we can make the change about asking the right questions. How do we grow the value to the environment? And when we think of environment, let's think of living things. It's like a nutrient. If you have emissions, but they're the right emissions, they're healthy. They will create something else. If you're a cell and you provide life, okay? Now, how can that cell give you more life, more energy? So let's connect those potentials that we ourselves have already been able to find, as I said, through the PVI as an example. So let's build on that opportunity. And as we are very used to doing, is thinking positive. Okay, I think this illustrates something that was presented earlier today by James Willis about the more good. Another way to look at it is, business individuals like to see trends going up. We're doing more, yes. If you are actually in the politics, you want more votes. Philosophically and thinking, I'm not a psychiatrist, but if we think of doing more good, the probability that we will close the gap and harmonize our definitions of what matters improve. Doing them, of course, in the standard and bodies organizations. So with the more good in mind, as I have illustrated here, automatically we get the less bad. And understand that impacts are impacts, but there are some impacts that you are more than willing to make so that the greater good in terms of the environment remains. So in short, what I will say is that we can do as we say in our emails. Please consider the environment before, of course, printing this email is what we get to see every day, and yet we still print it. So what I'm saying is let's not do that when we are planning, when we are constructing, when we're maintaining, when we're using, and let's think of how can we do more good? How can we actually get in that upcycle, rethink, and actually challenge ourselves, not to just take what's already in the box, but to create through research and collaboration with academia, fill the missing pieces in our life cycle assessments. Thank you very much.